So, Crashgate, one of the many controversies in the history of Formula One, and in my opinion, this is one of the worst, because when this came out, when this was confirmed to be a thing, it absolutely shook the foundations of the sport. It was at a time as well when Formula One was really struggling for credibility, not least because of the Spygate scandal that enveloped the sport just a few years ago. That's its own separate story, but let's focus on Crashgate. And the reason why I'm focusing on Crashgate today is because we've got the Singapore Grand Prix on this weekend, and the first ever Singapore Grand Prix in 2008 was the centre of this Crashgate controversy. Now, you've probably heard of Crashgate, you might have seen the pictures of Nelson Piquet Jr.'s Renault in the wall at the Marina Bay circuit, causing a safety car. But what actually happened with this? When did it all come out? And why was this such a horrible thing for Formula One? Well, let's set the scene. So this took place at the 2008 Singapore Grand Prix, the first ever Formula One Grand Prix run at this track, run at this country, and also the first ever night race in the series history as well. Now, Renault at this time were not the force they once were. They won back-to-back titles in 2005 and 2006 with their star driver Fernando Alonso. Alonso left the team for 2007 to join McLaren, but he returned for 2008. But the team was not a winning outfit really at this point and was really struggling for performances and results. In a desperate, as it turns out, in a desperate attempt to actually try and get a victory during this race, because they did not qualify well. Both Alonso and his teammate Piquet Jr. did not qualify well. They concocted a strategy to try and basically fix the race, to try and make a result that was not authentic, not organic. And how they did this was basically Alonso, he, instead of doing what was normal at the time, because this was a time during Formula One where you had refueling, normally what would happen is that cars further down the grid would start the race with a lot of fuel, run late into the race, and hope for a safety car. But they actually did the opposite with Alonso. They fueled him very light to try and give him a lot of pace in the early stages, and they pit him quite early. I think it was around lap 14 of 61, something like that. Alonso pits, and then straight after that, his teammate, Nelson Piquet Jr., literally got the instruction over the radio to throw his car into the rock wall, and that basically caused a safety car, because they knew that if Piquet Jr. crashed at that point in the track, then a safety car would have to come out, because there were no cranes to easily remove his car. In fact, in today's Formula One as well, it definitely would be, at the very minimum, a virtual safety car, but it was an actual safety car because the virtual safety car was not a thing back then. Now, also during this period, when a safety car was out on track, the pit lane closed. Now, this meant that anybody who did go into the pit lane, and I think there were a few, I think Massa and perhaps Kubica both had to pit because they were going to run out of fuel otherwise out on the track. They later got penalties for that, but because no one else could pit, it basically meant that Fernando Alonso had already done his pit stop, nobody else had done his pit stop, and the other guys ahead of him would have to stop pretty soon after. They would lose 30 seconds or so in the pits. Alonso has already made that gap back up because he, of course, caught up under safety car conditions when the pack gets closer together. End result of the race is basically that Alonso won the race. Now, at the time, there was no really kind of fishy, suspicious things. I mean, I'm sure some people will make the comparison, oh, well, Piquet, him having that crash at that point really helped out his teammate Alonso. Kind of jokingly probably, but it did, and it was an orchestrated thing. This all came out about a year or so later when Nelson Piquet, who was still at Renault, as was Fernando Alonso, he later said that once he got sacked from the team, basically because his performances were not very good in 2009, admittedly the car was absolutely awful in 2009 as well, but when Piquet Jr. got sacked by the team, he basically went to the FIA and just said, look, Renault made me do this. Pat Simmons and Flavio Briatore, who were two of the main people at Renault at the time, told him to do that, and of course this is illegal. This is race fixing. This is it's like match fixing in football. It's heavily illegal. So because of that, a case was opened, and basically the FIA found that Renault were guilty of this, that Briatore was guilty of this, and Simmons was guilty of this as well. I think Simmons was given like a 5-year ban at first, and Briatore was actually given a lifetime ban from all motorsport activities. These bans were later overturned, but their reputations suffered severe damage as a result, particularly Briatore, who has only now recently come back to Formula One with Alpine and Renault to be a guy on the board there. It's taken that long. It's taken like 15 years for him to come back in the end. And it also, unfortunately, really ended Renault's, well, made the beginning of the end really for Renault's time in Formula One. A lot of sponsors didn't want to be associated with the team as a result, and therefore they lost the money because of that. Their reputation again was severely damaged, and eventually the team would be sold off to become Lotus in 2011 and be rebranded as a fully Lotus team for 2012. So it had far-reaching consequences, and on top of that as well, like I said, this came at a time when we had Spygate, when we had McLaren copying Ferrari's car and getting disqualified from the Constructors' Championship in 2007 as a result. There was effectively a race-fixing scandal as well with Crashgate, all in the space of a couple of years. Formula One's reputation really suffered because a lot of people were thinking, can we trust what is actually happening out on track? Is this real? What don't we know about? These are the things that we do know about. What's been happening behind the scenes? So a really, really dark time for Formula One, which thank God it has recovered to now. It is well and truly one of the top sports in the world, and it's the fastest growing motorsport and probably the fastest growing sport full stop in the entire world right now. So things turned around eventually for Formula One, but it really, really entered a stagnation for a good 10 years probably, you could argue, until Liberty Media came in. Things really did not pick up for Formula One for a long time. It was a dark time for the sport, and in truth, and it's not an exaggeration to say that the sport itself could have been torn apart, could have been destroyed, and right now there might not be a Formula 1 Chronicle to subscribe to, but thankfully there is. So please do support us. We've had so many subscribers, so many followers on our social medias. We really do appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed that kind of rundown. I mean, I could speak for hours and hours about this. I mean, there's all sorts of things I've not even mentioned, like the vendetta that Max Mosley had against Briatore, and that's why his punishment was so severe. But that's another story for another day. That's a video for another day. I hope you enjoyed this kind of F1 history, F1 explained, if you will, about Crashgate and why it was such a big controversy and why to this day it is still one of the most controversial incidents in Formula 1 history. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring the bell as well to see much more Formula 1 content here on the F1Chronicle.com.